This is Counterpoint.
Welcome to Counterpoint. On tap for tonight, Jobbik in Hungary, Euroscepticism in the UK, and the continued destabilization of the Middle East. I'm Joshua Goodman, and joining me is Roland Freudenstein of the Center for European Studies.
Hi.
Hello, Roland. It's good to have you back.
Same here. Yeah, he was waiting for me to say Guten Abend.
Yeah.
He's always irritated by that. So
you always like to get... It actually settles me before the show when you speak in German.
I'm in Hanukkah mode. Already.
You're in Hanukkah mode, exactly. Daniel Schwammenthal is on assignment in the US, and Jan Techel has a doctor's note excusing him from work tonight. So but he promised he'd be listening, so I expect to get a message from him later on saying, excellent show, guys, even without me.
Well, what else could it be?
Exactly. On to more serious matters. The racist positions of the nationalist Jobbik party in Hungary are nothing new to even the casual observer of European politics. Their presence in the political arena and seeming rise in popularity is of great concern. Currently, Jobbik occupies 47 seats in the Hungarian legislature, which is just over 12%, and has 3 spots in the European Parliament, making it the third largest party in Hungary behind Viktor Orban's Fidesz and the left-leaning MSZP. The latest incident has come as a shock to even those who watched the issue closely. Speaking in the Hungarian parliament last week, Jobbik deputy Martin Grgely, we have a ringer in here, we'll get to that in a bit, called for the creation of a registry of Hungarian lawmakers and members of the Hungarian cabinet of Jewish origin. While not surprising given the party's track record, the comments were, to many, shocking. The speech has been widely condemned, though many questions remain concerning the responses within Hungary. Joining Roland and I in studio to discuss this latest Jobbik incident and the general state of anti-Semitism in Hungary, and obviously to help us with our pronunciation of Hungarian names, is Andi Grgely, a native of that country and president of the European Union of Jewish Students. Andi, welcome to Counterpoint.
Thank you very much, Josh.
My pleasure.
And thank you for inviting me. First of all, by the Hungarian pronounced name. So my name is Andi Grgely, and I know you never knew that, so now I just corrected it.
I'm so sorry. Of the 24 European Union languages to learn, Hungarian clearly hasn't made my top 5 yet, so...
We'll work on that.
We'll work on that, exactly.
It'll take a good-looking lady. And
Is that why people learn language? Is that how you learned all your languages, Roland?
There are not that many.
I don't know. I think on this show we have it documented that you speak Polish, a bit of Slovakian.
Yeah.
And
English, French, German.
English, French, German. Oh, yeah, so casual.
Okay, continue with the topic.
Yes, but Andi, let me ask you, what was the reaction from the Jewish community in Hungary to the statements of the noted parliamentarian? Was there perception that this call for a registry marked an escalation in the racist platform of the group, or was this to be expected in a very negative way? Was this to be expected and it's nothing new, it's pretty much this status quo, this same old, if you will?
Well, I think there were a lot of anti-Semitic remarks in the parliament in the past couple of months from Jobbik, and all of them had some, smaller remarks from the Jewish community. But this one was clearly a turning point, because that was the first time since 1944 that someone official in the Hungarian government wanted to list the Jewish people in the country and in the government. So that was definitely a turning point, and it showed really clearly when actually the next day after the speech there were a flash mob organized in front of the parliament by the March of the Living and the Jewish community, wearing it was a symbolic putting on the yellow star, the symbol
of Holocaust victims, yes. And
afterwards, a couple of days after, there was a 10 to 15,000 demonstration, a coalition by the ruling government, the opposition, and many civil organizations against the speech and against anti-Semitism.
So do you think, because one thing that really caught my eye when I was watching, and the video which was posted online, I was watching sort of the events, is without speaking Hungarian obviously, was that there was there was no real condemnation of it in the parliament. There was silence for most of it, and Jobbik Jobbik deputies were sitting there clapping and applauding the speech. So, but then you say the next day, they seem to, everyone else seemed to come to action. Do you think the response from both, the official members of the Hungarian government and even just the general society was sufficient in putting down this act and showing that it really is an extremist view and not something that's more mainstream?
Yeah, I thank you for your question. I think this was one of the most important part of the lack of actual condemnation right after the Márton Gyöngyösi speech, because the only thing he was told that his time is being up, like he has only 1 minute. The chair of the let's say the meeting
of the parliament,
that he has only 1 minute left, and then afterwards someone answered, I don't remember who exactly, saying that he doesn't think it's a good idea and it's not to be discussed here. But it was no one left the room.
Right.
No one stood up and said that this is outrageous, and most people were just like, he said it, fine.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at the reaction of the government and the main party in the government, which is Fidesz. My personal experience with Fidesz is that with all their Catholic national conservatism, which is, happens to be a political tendency that exists in Europe, with all that, nevertheless, I think they have always tried to distance themselves from anti-Semitism.
Right.
I'm not talking about the rank and file members. I'm talking about the leadership. I'm talking about people in government office. I'm talking about parliamentarians. And
Prime Minister Orbán spoke out on Monday in the parliament saying, under my rule, this will never happen.
Will not
and
stand.
actually,
You
it'll never
want
happen.
exactly what the Prime Minister said?
Yes.
The Hungarians will always save or keep the Jews secure.
Okay.
Now, if you think about this sentence a little deeper, what does it mean? The Hungarians will save the Jews. So who the Jews are?
They're not Hungarian. Oh, so you read into it that he was sort of separating the Jews from the Hungarians.
Okay, you can read this if you want, but I think. As I said, my personal experience with Fidesz people is that they are very well aware of the danger of being confounded with anti-Semitic attitudes, and with most of the Fidesz people I know, there is a clear intention to distance themselves from anti-Semitism.
Yes, Andi.
So I see your point, and I don't disagree, but I just want to throw in some facts which are really very relevant for this discussion. For the past couple of months, there were to the national curricula for the studies, national curricula, that's what you call it. They have voted in writers and to be read in public schools who were clearly anti-Semitic. And at that point, there was a huge discussion about it. All Jewish organizations in Hungary condemned this action. Furthermore, restitution of Horthy. He was responsible for thousands of Jewish people perished during the Shoah. He's naming squares after him, creating statues.
So there are, there are some contradictory measures that you see the point that maybe on an ideological level, you see, Roland, the statement you're putting forth, but perhaps when it comes down to practical or application of it, there are examples that deviate from the standard course of defending against anti-Semitism.
There are examples for this and examples for that.
Right.
Let me quote you a counterexample. When we were discussing the new party platform of the European People's Party, and we came to
the European People's Party being the center-right party, which
includes Fidesz.
Yes, of course.
And we were discussing a paragraph on Israel, and the Fidesz representatives were among the staunchest advocates of emphasizing a strong support for the State of Israel. And when they were asked why they were asked by others in the family, why are you so stubborn about this. They said, because we do not want to be associated with anti-Semitism.
It's an interesting argumentation and perhaps slightly problematic on its own as a reason to defend Israel.
Well, look, that's not the topic at hand. Without end about anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, or whatever. But I think it is important to also note this kind of example for a clear intention to draw a line there.
Well, given the contradictory examples that both of you have brought, I mean, you could put a glass half full or a glass half empty view on it. So let me ask you, Andi, as both from your perspective as the president of a pan-European Jewish organization that works with students and campus and young adults and also on campus, and also as a Hungarian who grew up in the community and frequently travels back. How do you think the Jewish community perceives the future in Hungary right now? Given, especially since you can see some positives, you can see some negatives. Is it, are they pessimistic? Are they saying that the day will come where the Jewish community will have to uproot itself? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Jewish community in Budapest is quite big by European standards. It's the fourth biggest, perhaps, in Europe, fifth, something like that. It's still a big community, regardless. Do they see a future? Do they see an eventual end, or are they uncertain and they just want to see how maybe the balancing act that Fidesz is playing plays out?
I think the Jewish community definitely sees a future. It's a very big and very flourishing community, and has changed a lot ever since, let's say, the switch in the regime since '89. There were Jewish schools, Jewish movements, a lot of Jewish organizations, activities, a lot of events, and a very flourishing Jewish community. So I definitely think that the Hungarian Jewish community does have a future, and they will have a future. I'm more and more concerned about the political situation, and not necessarily. I think that we should be worried about Jobbik. Everyone should be worried about Jobbik. The Jewish community should be worried about Jobbik, but the Jewish community is not their first target.
Right.
The Jobbik targets very highly the Roma community in Hungary, which is around 700,000 people, and they don't have this power that every time something happens against them in the parliament, which I'm sure happens more often than against the Jewish community, they don't have the power to bring together 15,000 people 2 days after to demonstrate together with Fidesz.
I saw that this summer when I was in Budapest. I was walking through a very central area, and there was a Roma protest against I guess discrimination. I can't read Hungarian, obviously, but it seemed they were protesting against discrimination, and there was a line of police, maybe 20, 30, and on the other side of the street were people in black with riot gear and screaming what seemed to be, and I asked someone who was standing next to me to explain what they were saying, and they came out as very racist slogans towards the Roma, and they said these are the Jobbik supporters. It's not obviously the group itself, but the supporters. So you do definitely see that threat. It's very prevalent. At the same time, the Jewish community does have security all over in front of the synagogue, and when big groups come, the police do feel obligated to protect them. But it's interesting that you say that the Roma are the number one issue. So, as a follow-up, I wondered, does the Jewish community feel an obligation to then, because the Roma don't have that support network, to advocate on their behalf? Because it is in essence, it's the same core issue of racism and intolerance. Should the Jewish community be working with the Roma community to defend their rights?
I definitely think they should.
Do they?
I'm not officially representing the Jewish community of Hungary. I think that there were minor attempts for cooperation. I can name many of them from civil society Jewish organizations who organize the Jewish leadership programs for Jewish and Roma youth, for empowerment, for exactly for these reasons, that these people should depend. They depend on each other. The same goes for the LGBT community. Every year when there is the Budapest Pride organized in the summer, you see more police than actually people in the parade. And I know it's an exaggeration, but it's quite close to it.
Regardless of the exact numbers, exactly, a large police presence to make sure that this goes off without violence is a pretty scary thought. Roland?
Now, for me, taking all this together, what it means is that two things. First of all, Democrats have to stick together against racism, and the day-to-day political conflicts, like the one in Hungary between the Fidesz government and the opposition, they have to take a second priority in moments like this. And I think in the end, Fidesz did the right thing by joining the demonstrations against Jobbik on this occasion. But the same goes, by the way, for the Roma minority, where I think, in vis-a-vis other member states of the European Union, the European Commission took quite clear action a year and a half ago, about discriminating measures by the French government against the Roma, and that was totally right. This is why we have the European Union. Now, having said that, so the first one was the community of Democrats, and the second one is, I think we should at least try to overcome the tendency to preach to the converted. Us four in the studio here, we are completely agreed. We should make an effort to go out and confront and talk to the people who have fundamentally different views, and who hold these prejudices against minorities, and somehow at least try to make them understand what makes us tick, and vice versa, and have an open dialogue.
Well, on the point of dialogue, Andi, is someone who may go back to Hungary. I won't ask you if you're going back or not, but someone who might go home. Do you see dialogue, the possibility of dialogue with these people, on the right? Because I know this summer you had an incident with them where you led protests to force the arrest, or call for the arrest, not force, but to call for the arrest of an accused Nazi, whose name I will not say because you pronounce it much better, but you can do so in your response. And in response, in the aftermath of it, you told me earlier, your face was put on a website with your personal details, and people started sending you hate mail. I mean, do you see the possibility for dialogue?
It's a very, very difficult question. I think, so just very, very briefly, what happened in the summer, there was a former war criminal found living in Budapest, 97 years old, called László Csatári, who was responsible for sending 15,000 people from Košice, from now it's part of Slovakia, to Auschwitz during the Second World War, and he fled. He was sentenced to death in Czechoslovakia, and then he fled. He went to Canada, and he was living there almost all his life. He came back to Hungary approximately 15 years ago. He somehow, I actually still don't know how, managed to come back to the country and live peacefully. In the meantime, the Simon Wiesenthal Center was looking for him, and actually a journalist from The Sun, the British newspaper, found him in his apartment in July. It was released on the 15th of July. On the 16th, me and my friends, colleagues from the European Union of Jewish Students organized a small flash mob / demonstration in front of his house, which probably this was also part of the reason why 2 days later he was arrested. And we were very happy because this demonstration made it to all over the news, from Australia to New Zealand, from Canada to Korea. But it also made it to the news in the neo-Nazi websites all over, especially in Hungary. There is a website called kuruc.info, which is illegal, which is a cloud website. It's not based in Hungary. It's on a cloud server, and they proposed money for finding all the people who took part in the demonstration, for finding more information, all the people who took part in the demonstration, the organizers. Of course, I was the easiest to find because my name was on the website of EUJS, and they kind of started a virtual hunt after the people who were there, meaning I needed to close down all my online accounts. I needed to, make everything secret in half a day, and that was very, very difficult. And next to that, we also received hundreds of threatening messages from people who were active readers of this website.
It's a pretty scary story, and not the positive that we usually like to end our segments on, but it's the reality of it.
Well, I just say that we need to distinguish between the voters of Jobbik and neo-Nazi organizations like the ones that you told us about. I still maintain that 70% of the people vote for that party. We need to somehow try to reach those people. And of course they're wrong in what they're doing. Right.
So you say that they have their converted class, but there's also a lot of people who vote for different reasons or are misguided and can be converted.
However, I understand. I exactly see your point. I wanted to add something. The reason I think, and it goes for most of the extreme organizations, extreme right especially, the reason why Jobbik got so successful in the previous elections is because they are the party who goes into every single town, every single village, and tells the people what they want to hear. They tell them that we are going to solve your problems. You have problem with your Roma neighbors? We're going to solve that. It won't be a problem anymore. Really gives hands-on solutions. And I'm not saying at all that these people are, they all hate everyone who is a minority. No, they have problems with their neighbor because sometimes they get in a fight and someone says them.
And this is where I think, again, a government's task would be to do more for the integration of Roma. And, as far as I know, the most serious planned attempt to even have a ministry now in the government for Roma integration. The best planned attempt to integrate Roma in Hungary is being made now in the last couple of years. And I know Zoltán Balog, the minister for that, and I really take him seriously when I see what he's doing and with what energy he is trying to address the problems of integrating this minority. It's a completely serious effort, and I think it will, in the long run, it will be successful in at least addressing these obvious integration problems.
Well, it's a big challenge because on the other side, as Andi pointed out, the great advantage of populist politics is that quite simply you can say whatever you want and you're really not held accountable for putting it into action. Sure. Since you're never, especially when you're in the opposition, it's when you come into power that maybe you get called out. Andi, thank you very much for coming in and talking to us. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Köszönöm.
He's got another language. It's a new rabbit out of the hat every week. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll turn our attentions to Euroscepticism in the UK. You're listening to Counterpoint. Welcome back to Counterpoint. Those who work in Brussels, or more specifically Euro-Brussels, the part of the city populated by EU institutions, technocrats and lobbyists alike, are all too familiar with the United Kingdom Independence Party, or UKIP, and its, well, frankly, dynamic leader Nigel Farage. Its notoriety and campaign to extract the UK from the EU now seems to be translating to popularity at home. Though the party has yet to win a seat in the parliament, it finished second in 2 by-elections last week and third in another. This led Farage himself to declare that his party is, to quote, going places. Joining us now in studio to discuss UKIP and the general shape of politics in the UK following last week's by-elections is Craig Rimmer, president of the right of centre think tank Parliament Street. Thank you for joining us, Craig.
Thank you. Yes.
Let's start by looking at the by-elections itself, which took place last week. The coalition of the Conservatives and Liberal Democrat parties seem to have been the biggest losers. Is that a fair assessment?
Unfortunately, yes. Obviously, the Liberals lost their deposit in 2 by-elections, right. 2 out of 3, and we were we ranked poorly. The Conservatives ranked poorly in the northern seats in Middlesbrough and in Rotherham. I think we put in a good show in Croydon, to be fair, but unfortunately this is turning out to be a problem for the Conservatives in terms of winning those big northern cities and sort of converting supports.
Well, I guess maybe to be fair, not that I'm defending their performance, but to be fair, the 3 seats were previously held by Labour, and it was just the replacement of Labour MPs anyway. So
absolutely.
So the bigger concern was in the vote totals, which there were significant drops.
Yeah, absolutely, significant drops. I mean, we could say midterm concerns, the economy, etc., but.
So on the flip side, is this a big day for Labour, or was it just status quo?
I personally think that it was a good day for Labour, and we do have things that we have to concern ourselves with, and it was a good day for UKIP. You have to give credit where credit's deserved, though I do think we put in a credible show in Croydon.
Right. But that does leave us with UKIP itself, and percentage-wise, I believe they were the biggest winners by a long shot in terms of picking up votes. In Brussels, they are a one-trick pony, which is whatever the issue, we oppose the EU's jurisdiction over this, and they have no right to make any decisions. Presumably, is that the same sort of impetus for their success at home? Is it Euroscepticism that drives support for UKIP?
I think it is, but I also think there's an element of they are the new protest party. The Liberal Democrats were a protest party before in some ways, though they wouldn't like to admit to that, and now they're in government with the Conservative Party. A lot of voters who would have voted Liberal just to say we're not happy with Labour or the Conservatives now are turning possibly to a natural home in UKIP. One thing I'd mention is, a few weeks before when we had the police commissioner elections, and it's a strong issue for the Conservative Party in terms of law and order. Conservatives did very well on that, and the UKIP vote was actually very small in terms of percentages.
Oh, it's interesting. So you're hinting that when it comes to practical issues, UKIP does far worse, but when it's just this general, as we discussed in the previous segment, general populism, they're very successful there.
Yes, I mean that's how I seem to see it. Yeah,
Roland, did you see it the same way?
I first of all, I see this not only across Europe but across all democracies. We have a decline, or at least an increasing weakness, of the big tent parties, of the traditional parties. We have countries like Germany and England, or Great Britain, where classically the party system has been very, very stable, contrary to Italy and France, for example. And even in those countries, look at the Pirate Party successes in Germany in recent years. Look at the decline of the big social democratic and Christian democratic parties in Germany, or in Britain, look at the declining share of the vote of such a standard and traditional party as the Tories. I think big parties are in trouble all over the world. That's because people are just disenfranchised.
Right. So what's the solution for these big parties? Because Well,
let me say two things here. One is, I think it won't be easy to get back to the original status quo which is actually significant of the decades after World War II, when political parties could achieve like 40% or more of a national vote. And sometimes they even achieved absolute majorities in parliament. I think these times are over for good. That's one thing. So we'll have more political actors on the stage.
And coalition governments of the future.
And coalition governments, even in England, where a coalition government is quite a sensation.
Yeah, it is a sensation.
But let me just finish with one more idea. Is the big parties, even though they're big and they're coalitions they're vast coalitions of different interests and voter groups, need a narrative. They can do without a guiding narrative for a couple of years, but in the long run, they need a worldview that keeps them together and shows the voters that this is what we stand for. I am not entirely sure, but you will correct me on that, I'm sure, that the Conservative Party today in Britain has such a coherent narrative. What I see is a very laudable attempt by David Cameron personally, especially, to enrich the Tory narrative by green elements, by more of an element of solidarity in society, and trying to almost harking back to the little platoons of Edmund Burke, to create a society which is coherent without necessarily the state intervening and creating through its own infrastructure and expenditure this social cohesion. But when I talk to members, rank and file members of the Conservative Party in Britain, I see a lot of Thatcherist heritage, which is nothing bad in my view. It's just something that does not completely converge with the narrative that we've been hearing from David Cameron over the last 5 or 8 years.
Do you agree with that assessment, Craig?
No, not entirely. I think that in essence, the Thatcherite inheritance runs through not just the Conservative Party but the Labour Party. Blair was as much of
New Labour.
Yes, Blair was as much a son of Thatcher as Major and in a way David Cameron. What we're seeing today are nuances of being our coalition partners being the Liberals and having to take them on board and keep them on board with the current coalition agreement, but also looking at being more not just classically liberal in terms of economic policy, but being more socially liberal in enhancing people's freedom in the United Kingdom as well. So it's been about that agenda. And as you say, the green agenda is laudable and is something everybody's having to embrace in some way or another. To some extent, but it's quite critical that we're not doing it to the extent that we're looking to do it too quickly and harm the economy. But I think what you're touching upon is that there is possibly frustration in the Conservative Party because we've been waiting so long to get back into government. And when we do it, we're doing it at a time of great economic crisis, so we can't make the decisions that the members would love to be made, and we're doing it with partners that are not natural bedfellows for us as well.
Right. On the question of this cohesive narrative, because I think you spoke of it, both of you, in the larger
let's come to Europe now.
Well, that's exactly where I'm coming.
That's where I'm afraid British voters are missing the clarity in the Tory narrative these days.
Well, I'm gonna just, before you comment on it, I mean that was one point in the Tory narrative, but then on the other hand, you have what I hear in the halls of Brussels, people saying, well, the Labour Party is the pro-EU party, and then they go into Parliament and they vote for not a budget freeze, which the Tories were pushing as some argued a Eurosceptic move. They vote for a decrease in the budget, which no one in Europe was really talking about, and it seemed like almost it was an anti-EU move.
Yes.
This absence of cohesive narrative makes me wonder, how maybe there is a cohesive narrative in the general public. Like, how Eurosceptic is the UK public, or is the perception from the political arena that the UK public is very Eurosceptic?
It's really hard to judge, because in some ways I think the debate has been so skewed in one direction, unfortunately, because of the media and political parties almost lining up to go with the media on this. Labour, as you say, it's been like Janus in the sense of looking in one direction and doing something in the other direction. It's not just about asking for a cut of 5% in the budget, but there was even talk that they might try and wrong-foot the Conservative Party by being the first to call for a referendum on exiting the EU. So
it's a very pro-Europe party there.
But I mean, look, this is an old trick of any opposition party in a country where, admittedly, a part of the population is Eurosceptic, and if I believe The Economist, and by now over 50%, slightly over 50% of Britons do want Britain to leave the European Union.
So does The Economist push them into the majority? If
No. Wait. What I was trying to say, this is a classical trick of an opposition in such a situation to, as you said, wrong foot the government, to bring the government into an embarrassing situation by asking a very fundamental question. That still does not necessarily mean that Labour is opposed to UK membership in the European Union.
Right. Since you mentioned the referendum, will it happen? Do you foresee it happening? And if so, approximately when? I note, there's bunch of, we can call them landmarks on the horizon. There's obviously the current budget debate in the EU. Then there's the framework for the next 7 years, which is essentially the budget over that period. The discussion of a renegotiation of the treaty, which is again another landmark that could change the EU or the UK's position in the EU. There's European elections in 2014, and then of course the ever looming UK general elections in 2015. Do you see one happening in any? I forgot. I'm so sorry. I forgot. Scottish independence could come up in 2014 as well. So, in the context of all of that, do you see a referendum on the horizon, and when?
And what would the question be?
There's a heady mix and of dates that are coming up. Absolutely. Yes, I do see a referendum coming. The interesting thing is, I don't think it's very good for UKIP, because essentially what you're going to have is probably the leadership of all three main parties having to argue for staying within the EU. And I suspect when it comes to the crunch and it's actually debated, that 70% of people would want to stay within the EU when they see that it could have an impact on jobs, the economy, travel, and general aspects like that. And the British are also small C conservative people. It's going to be about 40 years, isn't it, next year, since our membership of the EU common market, whatever you'd like to call it.
European communities.
I have to be honest, I don't foresee a big parade to celebrate it in the streets of London.
No, but I think people, if you think about it, I'm 37, and so I've grown up as part of this community, and there's going to be more and more people by the time it comes around that wouldn't know anything but being part of the EU, and it'd be quite difficult for them to vote against, I fear. In terms of strategy as well, once that debate has been had, and if, in my estimation, it's likely it's won instead in terms of staying in the EU, I don't see where UKIP can go from there.
Well, that is my question. Given the way you presented the position, I find your point actually about all the people who have grown up inside the EU in whatever configuration. But as this gets drawn out over the next couple of years, is this sort of the peak for UKIP then? Do we see this, because they haven't developed and with a name of the UK Independence Party, they don't really have the makeup to develop a very vast political platform. So if this is their single issue and it's they're not likely to succeed, is this really as good as it gets for Nigel Farage?
I think in some ways he's trying to repackage his party to take on more issues, and I think he's trying to move towards a more libertarian agenda. I guess if Europe fails for them as an issue, then maybe they'll try and rename, repackage, or talk about independence in terms of
individual
personal
liberties.
freedom.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Roland?
I'm not entirely sure that UKIP would actually lose on losing in or out referendum. I think they still might go far above the 17% they now have in votes in the British national elections, and that they would rate this as a huge success. And yes, indeed, they, in the long run, of course, they can, whichever way Britain's relationship with the European Union turns out, but they will not be able to thrive on just one issue, and they will have to diversify. Yeah.
Well, but their first marker will be 2014 when we have European Parliament elections, and currently UKIP is the second largest British party behind the Conservatives because of some readjustments. I think they've now pulled ahead with 12 seats to Labour's 10, and I have a sense that in Conservative circles there are fears that gap will be even closer. If not, UKIP will end up the largest European party for the British.
It's a real threat that could happen, that they could actually be the largest winners in the European elections, because unfortunately, I think what the EU has to do better is actually sell itself better in Britain itself, and also there needs to be more champions who are, in terms of staying in Europe and starting now and tackling the real issues. I mean, these guys don't stand up to British interests, these UKIP members of Parliament. They barely vote in the Parliament at all in terms of their voting record. Right. There have been key votes on financial transaction tax, which has been a large part of friction between the UK and partner countries, and they didn't bother turning up to vote to many of the votes on that in the Parliament.
Well, you say that the EU needs to sell itself to the UK.
It takes the help of governments, and I think you mentioned that in the second part of your answer. That I personally wish the current British government took a clearer stance on. Yes, we not only want to stay inside the European Union, we need to do so in Britain's interest. And the question, what can be renegotiated or repatriated in terms of competences, I'm afraid the potential for successful negotiations by any British government to repatriate competences are very, very limited.
And that was the point I was going to make when you intervened, was exactly, I think the Conservatives also probably need to sell to their own constituents and to the British public as a whole what their perspective is on Europe, what their vision is, and then in turn perhaps Labour will as well. Craig, thank you very much for joining us. Craig Rimmer, president of Parliament Street. For more on his work, visit www.parliamentstreet.org. Thank you for coming in, and we hope to have you back soon. We're going to take a short break, and you're listening to Counterpoint. Welcome back to Counterpoint. Roland, last week I picked Daniel Schwammenthal's brain on the evolving situation in Egypt, not in Europe.
Not yet.
We wouldn't want to do that. That could be dangerous. To briefly summarize, he said it was troublesome, which might actually be how he would describe Europe anyways. So fair enough. Since then, the circumstances have seemingly worsened. More power grabbing, a proposed constitution that, among many things, no longer includes language on the equality of women, and large protests both in favor and against the president. In fact, there was a headline from one article which really caught my eye, asking if President Mohamed Morsi is Egypt's new Mubarak. So let me ask you that. How do you assess the situation? Is Morsi seeking to be the new Mubarak, substituting Mubarak's secularism with the Muslim Brotherhood's brand of Islamism?
Well, first of all, let me point out the two worst case scenarios. That would be, and I emphasize would be, a kind of Islamist dictatorship or a civil war situation. Both scenarios have been painted on the wall, so to speak, in the last 2 weeks by observers. Now, I'm hopeful that none of those will come true in the foreseeable future. That means the next couple of months, right? But certainly what did not happen was the Iranian-style scenario of 1979 and 80, where, in a Bolshevik manner, a determined fundamentalist party first took over power and then sidelined and it eliminated all other political forces in the country. This has not happened, and I don't see it happening even by the 6 decrees of Mohamed Morsi on the 22nd of November. So I really think that we need to distinguish.
Why don't you see that happening, though?
I don't see it happening because as we see right now, Egypt is a civil society in statu nascendi. It is an open society. Newspapers can write more or less what they want. It is not a Saudi, Iranian, or whatever kind of a jihadist fundamentalist dictatorship. This is not the case. Now, civil war. Yes, there are mass demonstrations by the opponents of these decrees and of the Brotherhood. And it's good that these people demonstrate, and it's the first time since the revolution of 2011 that they come out in force. And yes, on the other hand, we do have counter demonstrations by the supporters of the Brotherhood. Now, this looks like a very tense situation, but this is a classical phenomenon, and media tend to focus on the centers of the capital, on the center of the capital, look at every kind of demonstration. And, Egypt happens to be a country where demonstrations do turn violent comparatively quickly, and where police comparatively quickly resorts to tear gas and the baton. So I think that taken all this together, we are not moving to a civil war situation right now. There is tension in society. There is legitimate protest against the decrees of President Morsi. But indeed, I think what should worry us most is the constitution, because he announced, and I take his word for that his quasi-dictatorial powers only will be in force as long as until the new constitution is in force.
Except doesn't the constitution give him more powers anyways?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I do not see that. What I see is what you said in your intro, is that this constitution has clearly Islamist overtones, and even though the Sharia has been a part of the Egyptian constitution for ever since it existed, the other aspects, like, for example, the absence of an emphasis on women's rights, a definition of patriotism that is very, very interpretable, and can be potentially used against opposition. But I don't see in this constitution dictatorial powers for the president, which he has right now, according to his decree, and against which there are legitimate protests in the country.
Well, you mentioned the opposition. Traditionally, the protectors of the rights of the people has always fallen on. You probably can say this sarcastically as an observer of Egypt in the past, on the military. And the military has said they will stay out of this. So, who is the opposition that can fight for the preservation of the democratic freedoms that were supposed to be enshrined in Egyptian society? Who are they? Where are these liberal voices? Do they exist? Because that was a problem during the protests against, while there were mass protests against Mubarak, there wasn't a unified or even structured liberal opposition, as we like to call it in Europe. Has that evolved, and are they there?
Well, see, this is the interesting thing, because I think for the first time, a very heterogeneous, but nevertheless, in one point, a unified opposition has formed for the first time since the revolution, and these are people who are picking up the axe that has been thrown to them by the Muslim Brotherhood, in cahoots with the Salafists. Let me emphasize that. This is very important. That when the situation gets really tense, and we're talking about fundamental problems like now, the fact that the Brotherhood teams up with the Salafists is something that should be alarming, and that is, in fact, alarming the rest of the country and the rest of the political spectrum.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. In the parliamentary elections, which I guess don't count anymore because there is no parliament and they dissolved them. They dissolved it. The Muslim Brotherhood got about approximately 40%, but the Salafists got another 20%, which gave them a political majority of 60%.
Yeah, well, this is the interesting thing, is that they in fact do vote together on a couple of things, and that they now have teamed up against this protest movement. But then again, the protest movement is also composed of many different forces. Not all of them are liberal, by the way. I mean, some of the trade unions are neo-Nasserites, and Nasserism is about as anti-Western as somewhere between the Salafists and the Muslim Brotherhood in terms of anti-Westernism.
Well, and for our listeners who don't know Nasserism, it's a pan-Arabism. It's and a very
indeed,
it's
Ba'ath. This is a kind of national socialist. Ideology that was formed in the 1930s with clear affinities to European fascism. That is Ba'ath. That is Ba'athism in the Middle East, and Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser was definitely one of its proponents. But let me just one thing. So not all these forces are liberals, but I think what is important is that these are all seculars. These are people who want a state which is separated from the mosque, to put it that way. We in Europe, we would say state and church. Obviously, in Egypt, we speak of state and mosque, at least in the case of the Brotherhood. And, even Christians who are, some of the Egyptian Christians, the Copts, have very little to do with European Christians. And yet, they are totally adamant in keeping religion and state apart. because they know that it's going to end up bad for them if there's too much of a mix-up, of which there is a danger now.
It's interesting you frame it that way. The way I read it is it's no longer a struggle between democracy and dictatorship. It's a struggle between secular and religious.
And that's one of the main dividing lines of the entire Middle East now.
Right.
It's a question of religion and politics, and religion in politics, and can you keep the state separate from some kind of religious rule.
And that's a topic we'll have to pick up another time, because we are running out of minutes on the clock for this show. So our thanks to Andi Grgely of the European Union of Jews. Grgely. Thank you, Roland.
Yeah. It's all right. She's not here, so I'm doing it for her.
I'm going to make you come 10 minutes early before every show to work with me on the various names. Yeah. And to Craig Rimmer, that's an easy one, of Parliament Street, and of course to Eddy Sanfilippo for his production work. We'll be back next week for what will unfortunately be our last show of 2012. I know there were 5 listeners out there who, when I paused, went, "Oh no, where are they going to go?" And if last year's year in review show was any indication, you really won't want to miss this one. That was probably our peak for 2011. So please join us next week at 18:30 here on 90.2 FM. And until then, on behalf of Roland Freudenstein, I'm Joshua Goodman. Good night from Counterpoint.